Good afternoon, dear colleagues and guests. Today it is the 24th of December 2021, 11 a.m. according to Moscow time. Allow me to consider open the meeting of the Dissertation Council for the degree of the candidate of Pedagogical Sciences in the Scientific Specialization 582 Theory and Methods of Training and Education, Russian as a Foreign Language, Level of Professional Education, on the topic Teaching Chinese Students of Philology to Use Interrogative Sentences with Particles Indeed and Really, Level B2. And according to the order of the Scientific Secretary of St. Petersburg University, Mr. Gnotov, according to the order from the 19th of October 2021, number 9964/1, me, Larissa Ternaeva, was appointed the chairperson of this Dissertation Council, and also allow me to introduce my fellow board members. Galina Vasilyeva, Doctor of Philology, Professor of Intercultural Communication, Russian, State Pedagogical University, named after Hudson. Елена Чиркова, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Foreign Languages, St. Petersburg State Architectural and Civil Engineering University. In the remote interactive mode, we have got Ekaterina Protasova, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, adjunct Professor of the Humanitarian Faculty, Helsinki University, Finland. Ekaterina Yurievna, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can. The answer is positive. Scientific Supervisor, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Russian as a Foreign Language and Methods of its Teaching, Leonid Moskovkin. To improve the quality of communication, I ask you, dear colleagues, to turn off your microphone, but do not forget to turn them on when you are given the floor. It concerns the colleagues who are in the remote interactive mode. I also inform you that audio and video recording of our meeting is being conducted, as well as live broadcast on St. Petersburg University website. Simultaneous interpretation of speeches from Russian into English is being provided. At this time, an email address is posted on the live broadcast of the meeting of the Dissertation Council, but during the meeting, all listeners can express their opinions and send questions to the applicant online concerning her dissertation and the current scientific discussion of the speech. These questions will be forwarded to me by the technical services, and I will voice them during the discussion. And questions must be related to the applicant's presentation and the content of the dissertation, and the name, position, and place of work of the author of the question must be indicated. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion, to the discussion of the dissertation, to the text and assessment of the dissertation itself, will not be voiced. In accordance with the procedure for awarding the academic degree of Candidate of Sciences, academic degree of Doctor of Sciences at St. Petersburg University, approved by local regulations of St. Petersburg University, hereinafter the procedure, a meeting of the Dissertation Council is considered eligible if at least 2/3 of the approved membership of the Council takes part in its work, but not less than 4 people. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 people. 5 members are present, including 1 member in the remote interactive mode. Audio and visual contact is provided. And please, dear worker of the dissertation department, please form the attendance list. The procedure of today's meeting of the Dissertation Council with a total duration of approximately 2 hours is the following. A brief report of the chairperson on the documents submitted by the applicant for a scientific degree and their compliance with the established requirements, answers to possible questions about 5 minutes, a short presentation by the applicant for a scientific degree reflecting the main points of the research, approximately 20 minutes, questions to the applicant strictly according to the report, no more than 2 minutes per question, answers of the applicant, no more than 15 minutes for all questions, speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn with the assessment of the dissertation research with the summary of their positions, with questions and suggestions for the dissertation, about 10 minutes per speaker, the speech of the chairperson with the review, about 10 minutes, answers of the applicant for a scientific degree to questions and comments of the members of the Dissertation Council, no more than 20 minutes, open discussion, speeches at the request of those present at the defense of the dissertation with a summary of their positions and or with specific questions and proposals for the dissertation strictly on the topic of the research, no more than 2 minutes for everyone. At the same time, all interested people are requested to register in the registration form and completely introduce themselves before the performance. Then presentation by the chairman of the questions addressed to the applicant, which came in order to discuss the speech, and scientific discussion on the broadcast of the meeting of the Dissertation Council on the site of St. Petersburg University. Answers of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes per questions. Speech of the scientific supervisor of the applicant, no more than 3 minutes. Discussion of the results of the defense by the members of the Dissertation Council before the open vote, during which the sound of the broadcast is muted, about 5 minutes. Open roll call, counting of votes by the chairman of the Dissertation Council with the entry of the results into the minutes of the meeting, making a decision on awarding or not awarding an academic degree, concluding remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, are there any questions or objections to this regulation? If there are no objections, I will proceed to the implementation of the rules of the meeting, but before, please turn off the sound of mobile phones. Those colleagues who are in the remote interactive mode, please don't switch off your mobile phones in order to contact with you in case of technical breakdowns. So I'm starting to conduct the meeting. Chairman's brief report. The dissertation of Hsieh Sin Yu for the degree specialization 582, theory and methods of training and education, Russian as a foreign language, level of professional education, on the topic teaching Chinese students of philology to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really, was accepted for the defense by the order from the 28th of September 2021, number 9233/1. Hsieh Sin Yu wrote her dissertation research on the basis of St. Petersburg University, and her scientific supervisor is Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Russian as a foreign language and its teaching methods, Viktor Moskovkin. The number of publications of the candidate, 3 books in peer-reviewed journals stated by the Ministry of the Education of the Russian Federation. There are 3 publications. There are no publications in Web of Science and Scopus. All the documents submitted by the candidate conforms with the requirements of St. Petersburg University and are stored in attestation file of the candidate. Their copies are kept by the work of dissertation councils. Before giving the floor to our candidate, dear board members, do you have general questions to the candidate? And if there is a necessity to voice all the documents submitted by our candidate, no questions. And now the brief report of the candidate, approximately 15 minutes. Dear Chairman, dear members of the Dissertation Council, dear attendees, I'm going to introduce my dissertation to you on the topic teaching Chinese students of philology to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really level B2. Interrogative sentences with particles used in Russian colloquial speech to express the speaker's attitude to surrounding reality. They communicated the situation as a whole to a specific person, as well as to establish contact with the interlocutor and increase the impact on him. These sentences are widely used in colloquial speech, as evidenced by the high frequency of interrogative particles. Really? And indeed, the communicative significance of interrogative sentences with these particles, their prevalence in colloquial speech, show that full-fledged interpersonal communication is impossible without the ability to use these sentences. Therefore, there is an objective necessity for the formation of these skills in Chinese students. The relevance of this study is due to the need to resolve pedagogical contradictions between the needs of foreign students of level B2 to use sentences with interrogative particles in their speech, perhaps, and the lack of ability to use them. Between the existing requirements for the formation of these skills in students and the insufficient implementation of these requirements in the learning process, between the need to form these skills in foreign students and the lack of elaboration of the methodology for their formation in the scientific literature, between the need to organize the process of the formation of these skills and the reflection of the methods of their formation in the educational literature. The object of the research is the process of forming the skills of using interrogative sentences with particles in Chinese students, using particles indeed and really, level B2. The subject of the research is a set of tasks and exercises aimed at the formation of these skills. The hypothesis of the research: teaching Chinese students of philology level B2 to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really will be more effective if at the tentative stage students will get acquainted with modal shades, lexical means and peculiarities of intonation of these sentences, as well as correlate them with nonverbal means of communication. At this standardizing stage, students will pay attention to the organization of a comprehensive mastering of speech skills, solving these sentences. At a varying stage, the focus will be on role-playing games. In the learning process, the possible influence of the Chinese language will be taken into account. In some cases, cross-language comparisons will be carried out. The purpose of the study is to develop and experimental tests, a set of tasks and exercises aimed at teaching Chinese students of philology level B2 to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really. The main findings of the study are as follows. Number one, the linguistic features of interrogative sentences with particles perhaps have been established, which must be taken into account in the learning process. A table of correspondence between the types of these sentences, their modal shades, intonation structures, and non-verbal means of communication has been developed, which can serve as a reference point for teachers of Russian as a foreign language. Number two, in the process of comparison of Russian interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really, and the Chinese counter analogues the difficulties the Chinese students may experience in mastering these sentences were found out. Number three, it has been established that in the process of teaching Chinese students of philology the Russian language level B2, it is necessary to form in them the ability to respond to the interlocutor's remarks containing interrogative sentences with particles really and indeed, the ability to respond to the interlocutor's remarks using these sentences, the ability to indicate a dialogue when using them. Number four, particular methodological principles have been developed, stipulated by the specifics of the studied language material, the principle of separating modal shades of interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really, the principle of separation intonation structures is necessary for the use of interrogative sentences with different modal shades, the principles of interconnection of interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really, and their nonverbal character. Number five, a set of tasks and exercises has been developed designed to teach Chinese students to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really, in accordance with the three-stage scheme of the formation of speech skills according to Sergei Shatilov. In the process of using this complex, it is planned to work on the formation of lexical, grammatical, and intonational skills that ensure the use of these sentences, as well as work with non-verbal means of communication. And the varying stage of training, special attention is paid to role-playing games. Number six, two algorithms for the teacher's actions at the forming stage of skill formation have been developed. The examples of such tasks an experimental check of the effectiveness of using the set of tasks and exercises in the process of teaching Russian language to Chinese students of philology was carried out. Experimental verification showed that the level of formation of the skills to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really in the experimental group exceeded the level of formation of the skills in the control group by 23.1%. During the training, the experimental group improved the average indicator for the group by 28.5%. Then, as in the control, only 5.4%, thus the hypothesis of the study was confirmed. Then the dialogues according to the situations were offered to compose model shades of these particles should be studied. If you are a student and you are always late for classes, and today you have been late for the Russian language test, and please explain the reason of you being late. And you are a Russian language teacher, and one of your students is always late for classes, and today he has been late for the test, and these particles indeed and really were used with model shade. Number 8, experimental check was conducted. In the process of teaching of Chinese students of philology, experimental check showed that the level of these skills to use particles indeed and really in the experimental group, in control group, it was 23.1%, and experimental group improved the average indicator for the group by 28.5%, as I have already mentioned, and whereas in the control group only 5.4%. Thus, the hypothesis of the study was confirmed. Thank you very much for your attention. Are there any questions to our candidate? Strictly according to the text of the report. I have got 2 questions. The first, what is the number of teaching hours is necessary to teach using the sentences with these particles? Indeed, really 8 academic hours. And 4 hours are allocated for indeed, and 4 hours are allocated for really. And you know that we have got reduced academic hours, and if we spend 8 hours for these particles, what will we do with other particles? Which methods were used for teaching nonverbal means? Complex of exercises and tasks and exercises were not taken account by us in terms of using nonverbal means of communication, but we used developed table of correspondence of model evaluations. We developed the table of correspondence of model evaluations of interrogative particles, international construction, but there was not special task to educate students in our dissertation, but we pay attention to the correlation of verbal and non-verbal means of communication. But this aspect was stated in your dissertation, the connection of verbal and non-verbal means. Are there any other questions? Sin Yu. The question is connected with non-verbal means of communication. Tell us, please, whether you used any visual means of teaching, methods of teaching, or international specific structures, whether you invited Russian students, how did you fill the table with the means of nonverbal communication. Thank you very much for your question. I did not take into account nonverbal means of communication, but we will take it into account in our further study. Any other questions? I have a question. In your role play, you show micro dialects with the sentences with particles indeed and really. What did you use? What was the basis for these sentences? Did you hear them anywhere or read or invented yourself? We checked different material, and we also have the material of national corpus of the Russian language, and we took native Russian speakers as the basis. We listened them. Thank you very much for your question. Ekaterina Yurievna, do you have any questions? No questions. Thank you very much. I remind you and the speeches of the board members. All the reviews were published at St. Petersburg University website. I offer you to focus only on the main moments, remarks and questions to the candidate. Do you have any objections? No, thank you. Please. Nina Fedotova. Over the past years, a lot of Methodists speak about the focus on grammatical aspect when foreigners are taught Russian, and it is actual especially for Chinese students. And this work is accomplished in this direction. According to the words of our candidate, according to her words, this work studies linguistic peculiarities of interrogative sentences with particles really and indeed, and it's their connection with nonverbal means of communication. The dissertation interprets linguistic peculiarities of interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really, and the correlations of modal shades of these sentences were stated, their lexical feeling and international feeling, and the results of comparison with these particles are of particular attention, especially if we compare them with their analogues in the Chinese languages. The difficulties which Chinese students have when they study the structure of such sentences. One of the positive sides of this work is the developed theoretical complex of exercises which is aimed at the teaching Chinese students to construct interrogative sentences with particles really and indeed, and for the development of the methods of Hsieh Sin Yu analyzed the tasks and exercises which are represented in the textbooks on the Russian language as a foreign one. Despite the dignities of the study, there are some drawbacks. Number one, hypothesis of the research can't be based according to the formula. The teaching process will be more effective if a student is taught to anything specifically. And how did you take into account in the complex of exercises nonverbal means of communication? And the module of teaching, paragraph 2.2, is not the model. In fact, even if you specify that in this study the definition of the model is viewed in purely practical aspect, the stages of teaching correlate with the stages of formation of the skills offered by Sergei Shatilov. But you did not point out to the theory of stage character of skills formation. And some examples are artificial. For example, on the internet, I read that every year Russian citizen eats 64 kilograms of potato, and the answer, one person can't eat such a quantity of potato. Maybe it's humor. In this context, it's not necessary to use particle really, and intention does not correlate the key. He can't have so many girls, and the answer and the response, is it really possible to deceive in such a way? And out of 198 used sources, only 9 works were published after 2016. These sources and the rest of the sources are outdated. But the dissertation of our candidate on the whole conforms with the main requirements stated by the order from the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1, procedure on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, points 9 and 11 were not violated by our candidate. I remind you that you can answer after each speaker. I offer you to answer all the speeches at the end of the discussion. Galina Mikhailovna, the floor is yours. No voice in the microphone. I studied the work of Hsieh Sin Yu and I want to say a few words about this study. And I am sure that is written for the actual topic. In fact, it is very important to teach foreign students to use different communicative constructions in interrogative sentences. The actuality is stipulated by the frequency of particles indeed and really. It is proved by dictionaries, natural corpus of the Russian language. My review is placed at website of St. Petersburg University. I would like to focus on the main moments, and the work is accomplished on significant theoretical basis, and the candidate studied these questions question from different angles. For example, tradition of the description of such sentences in the Russian language. Model shades were figured out using these particles indeed and really, and another type of sentences was taken into account, and the description of intonation of interrogative sentences with particles really and indeed, and it is accomplished using detailed, significant theoretical material and the address to material of intercultural communication, and it proves the interdisciplinary level of the dissertation and increases the theoretical significance of the dissertation and peculiarities for such type of sentences in Russian and Chinese. And this serious theoretical basis allowed our candidate to develop the methodology. She studied types of exercises from textbooks on this topic. She explained the necessity of the development of special educational complex, and she developed this complex and tested it experimentally. This complex is aimed at not only the ability to react interlocutors' utterances. It is aimed at the ability of forming the dialect. It is very difficult for Chinese students. And here I want to say that the results of our candidate prove the actuality of the methodology which was developed. According to formal indicators, according to the number of works which were published, according to the provisions for the defense and the tasks of the dissertation, proves the success of this dissertation. But I have got some specifying and discursive questions. The dissertation is called Teaching Chinese Students of Philology to Use Interrogative Sentences with Particles and Indeed and Really. Do you teach the students? Is it different, the teaching of philological students and students of other specialities? The second question, it's not significant, but it's interesting for me to know, do you consider actual to take into account in the teaching of foreign students to use particles indeed and really in rhetorical question to show confidence in opposite response. For example, don't you know that it is forbidden to smoke here? The next question. Did you take into account in control experiments the increase of international skills in the use of sentences with particles indeed and really? And to what extent this intonation influenced the understanding of modal shades of sentences? And to what extent, taking into account non-verbal means of communication, accompanying the use of interrogative sentences with the particles indeed and really, influence the forming of skills in order to understand modal shades of these particles. The dissertation of our candidate on the topic teaching Chinese students of philology to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really conforms with the requirements from the 19th of November 2021 number 11181/1 procedure on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and our candidate deserves the degree of the candidate of pedagogical sciences, specialization 582, theory and methods of training and education, Russian as a foreign language, level of professional education points 9 and the level were not violated by our candidate. Thank you very much. Then, Elena Ivanovna, the floor is yours. First of all, I would like to say that I read your work with great pleasure, and despite the fact that the sentences with particles indeed and really were analyzed in detail in linguistic literature, the modal shades and intonations were studied in different languages, in Italian, English, and our candidate filled the gaps in this area and the specificity of their use in Russian and Chinese. I would like to say that I liked the structure of the work. In my opinion, it is only possible in this research, and the positive moments are the tables which you used from the first to the fourth table. They are useful not only for structuring the material. Of high interest is the second chapter, which includes the complex of tasks and sentences containing particles indeed and really. The logical is the algorithm of action of the teacher, which were described in the literature, the different stages of speech skills forming. Organization of detailed experiment and its results prove that the use of the material during classes are not accidental. They are the results of realized methodology. The appendixes are very interesting and full. Completed, they can be used not only in experimental research, but also as an experimental material. Despite the positive sides, there are some drawbacks. The first question, at the beginning of the work, there are some contradictions in the work, which results were obtained during your study can lift these contradictions. Number two, one of the components which allow to organize the work with interrogative sentences containing indeed and really are non-verbal means of communication. Page 30-31, you consider some of them. They are connected first of all with emotions, which show non-verbal movements. Practical experimental research conducted by the author prove that foreign students, it is important for foreign students to interpret non-verbal means of communication, mimics and gestures, because it helps to understand modal shades of interrogative sentences which are used by the speaker, but copying them can make the sentence of dual character unclear. Number three, page 40. On page 40, you study the peculiarities of dialogue and dialogue speech, but the particles indeed and really are used not only as a part of interrogative sentences for the information in a dialogue, which does not always have question-answer form. In such cases, when there is a problem of selection of scientific material, it is necessary to put limitations. For example, in our research, we focus on a dialogue, leaving behind the use of particles in monologues, or there is a lot of intonational shades, and these remarks don't reduce overall positive impression from the research. Thus, the dissertation of Hsieh Sin Yu is completed research, original one, and as the results of the work are new and precious in theoretical and practical respect. The dissertation of our candidate on the topic teaching Chinese students of philology to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really conforms with the main requirements stated by the order from the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1, procedure on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and our candidate deserves the degree of the candidate of pedagogical sciences, specialization 582, theory and methods of training and education, Russian as a foreign language, level of professional education, points 9 and 11 were not violated by the candidate. Ekaterina Yurievna, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. It seemed to me that the topic of the dissertation was carefully chosen, and these particles indeed and really are very specific and complex, and it's very difficult to interpret them into another language, but nevertheless Hsieh Sin Yu analyzed this topic. She analyzed everything carefully. She deepened into the context which defines model shades of these particles. The provisions for the defense are clear. It is interesting that even federal state standards take part in this dissertation research, as well as other opponents. I highlight that international and mimical gestures of difference in Chinese and Russian can provoke difficulties in teaching Chinese students. In this respect, they simplify the composition of the sentences. There is in-depth analysis which is connected with differences between languages. It would be better to use the theory of semantical primitives of Universitetskaya and understand what is meant in this or that utterance. And the concept, the use of methodological concept of Shatilov is in place. The practical stage of teaching is very qualitative, and I have a questions. The photos in the appendix don't correspond to the situations which you described. And what's the attitude of students for such number of hours for studying this topic? Page 58, you say that when you pronounce a sentence, is it really the truth, and it is necessary to open your eyes wider, lift your eyebrows, open your mouth, and covering it with your hand, and so on. And which language do you use when you teach? And can all the emotions be described in Chinese? The dissertation of Hsieh Sin Yu on the topic teaching Chinese students of philology to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed that really corresponds with the main requirements stated by the order. Procedure on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and our candidate deserves the degree of the candidate of pedagogical sciences, specialization 582, theory and methods of training and education, Russian as a foreign language, level of professional education, points 9 and 11 were not violated by the candidate. Thank you very much. I think that here the influence of advertising banners is very obvious, and I mean the eyes and opened mouths. I think that it is the influence of advertising industry. Please don't follow what is shown on these banners. And my feedback, I'm not going to focus on the actuality, scientific and practical significance. I think that there is significant linguistic explanation on the basis of the work. The role of the context of the expression of the modality is shown, and I would like to highlight it once again. The attempt to describe the connection of verbal and non-verbal factors. The comparative analysis was conducted by the author concerning Russian interrogative sentences with their analogs in Chinese. Structural differences of these speech acts does not have an adverse effect. And I have a question. What do you mean by the structural differences? Of the analogs of in Russian and Chinese? The main difficulties were shown which Chinese students have, and the author and the tones should be compared. Well, and there is a question about the stress in the Russian language. I mean, tone. And international formation of these structures in the Russian language. The methodological means produce positive impression. Methodological means offered by the author produce positive impression. They are diverse, include pair work, they include role play, situational dialogues, they work with illustrative material, the use of visual aids, and so on. The parameters of evaluation of the tasks are carefully developed. On the whole, the hypothesis can be proved. Scientific novelty is adequate. The textual analysis of the research proves that the author is an expert and professional lexis, and the design conforms with the requirements for the works of such a type. At the same time, there are some specifying questions. They are sort of recommendations. In my opinion, there is a question or doubt about the subject of the research. It is defined in the complex of tasks and exercise aimed at formation and so on. I think that the subject of the research is not only the complex, but the development of the complex, because only complex, it sounds neutrally, but the development of the complex, it is the subject of the research. There is a question about the correctness about scientific novelty, the interpretation from the methodological point of view, the correlation of model shades such sentences and the use lexical nonverbal means of communication in them, the figuring out the difficulties of Chinese students, and all this is without doubt. And why do I attribute to this in the analysis of educational literature? The second, experimental test is attributed to scientific novelty. In my opinion, scientific novelty of the research includes contribution into this sphere of knowledge. I don't think that the analysis of the literature is a contribution. And as for experimental test, it can't be considered as scientific contribution. And then I want to focus on theoretical significance and scientific novelty. As a theoretical significance, the author repeats what she stated in scientific novelty. It is repetition with some paraphrasing, which was stated in the scientific novelty. And at the same time, the author skipped the moment concerning theoretical significance. Theoretical significance of the research. The comparison of interrogative sentences with their analogues in Chinese was done. It can be attributed to scientific significance as well as factors which helps transference and interference and cause the interference of native language. That's why it seemed to me that theoretical significance is deeper than you stated. There are some small remarks. I agree with them. I mean the remarks from my colleagues. I'm not going to focus on them. And all my remarks don't influence overall high appreciation of this study, and they are of specifying and recommendative character. The study is completed, independent, and on the whole, the candidate managed to achieve the aim, and the dissertation of our candidate on the topic teaching Chinese students of philology to use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really conforms the requirements from the 1st of September 2016, number 68, 21/1, procedure on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and our candidate deserved the degree of the candidate of pedagogical sciences, specialization 582, theory and methods of training and education, Russian as a foreign language, level of professional education. Points 9 and 11 of the procedure were not violated by the candidate. We are grateful to all members of the Dissertation Council for the interest to our work, for questions and comments expressed. Let me answer them. Answers to the questions of Galina Mikhailovna Vasilyeva. Question 1. Teaching interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really for philology students level B2 is different from teaching foreign students of other specialities of the humanitarian profile level B2. Firstly, in the curricula for philology students, more teaching hours are usually allocated for the study of the Russian language, including the spoken language, and for students of other specializations of the humanitarian profile. This makes it possible to pay more attention to interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really. Secondly, in classes with philologists, literary texts are used, video clips are viewed in which Russian speakers use interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really. Thus, the existing differences are due to different conditions and content of training. Question 2. When teaching foreign students to use interrogative sentences with particles, we really take into account the use of these sentences in the function of rhetorical questions. Don't you know that smoking is prohibited here? This proposal has a connotation of an expressive statement. Number 2, is it really possible to live in such filth? This proposal has a shade of expressive denial. Number 3, especially in the course of the research, intonation skills were not measured. Also, the degree of influence of nonverbal means on the formation of the skills of using interrogative sentences with particles was not specifically studied. Answers to questions and comments of Elena Ivanovna Cherkova. Question 1. The pedagogical contradictions indicated in the introduction to the dissertation are removed by the whole complex of research results, but first of all by the following results. The teaching methodology described in the dissertation: goals, principles, teaching methods, algorithm for working in the classroom, a developed set of tasks and exercises, empirical confirmation of the ability to successfully form, the ability to understand and use sentences, with interrogative particles in speech. Perhaps we accept all the comments made by Yelena Ivanovna, and we will take them into account in our future work. Answers to the questions and comments of Nina Leonidovna Fedotova. Nina Leonidovna asks how the use of nonverbal communication was taken into account in the set of exercises. In the complex of tasks and exercises, we did not take into account the use of nonverbal means of communication. However, when organizing the performance of exercises and games by students, we used the table of correspondences, of modal shades, of interrogative sentences, intonation structures, and nonverbal means developed by us. Although the dissertation did not set a special task to teach students nonverbal means of communication, we drew students' attention to the connection between verbal and nonverbal means of communication. We thank Nina Leonidovna for her valuable comments. We accept them and promise to take them into account in our future work. Answers to questions of Yekaterina Protasova. Question 1. Photos for assignments did not cause difficulties for students, since when performing these assignments, students did not need to determine the modality of interrogative particles. Modal shade that students had to express was already indicated by the teacher. Students only had to compose a dialogue using this modal shade. Question number 2. Students treated the study of interrogative sentences with particles perhaps with great interest, since the existing classes are not enough for them to master spoken language. They were happy to complete all the tasks, especially role plays. Question 3. In the process of studying nonverbal means of expressing emotions, we used 3 dictionaries of gestures and facial expressions: Akishin and Kano, Fedorov and Tumin, and Kuznetsova. Question number 4. We conducted classes in Russian. The terms shade of expressively expressed affirmation and shade of expressively expressed negation were translated into Chinese by Chinese students. During the classes, Chinese students pronounced these shades in Russian, since their language level B2 allows them to use Russian terminology in their speech. Question number 5. The Chinese have the same emotions as the Russians, while educated people rarely use gestures to express emotions. Emotions are most often indicated by facial expressions and raised voice. Question 6. In the Chinese language, there are analogues of Russian interrogative sentences with particles indeed and really, which were considered in the thesis. Question number 7. We did not use videos in the classroom either to illustrate emotions or to compare the expression of emotions in Russian and Chinese. Thank you for this question. This may become the topic for our future research. Answers to Larissa Petrovna Tarnaeva's questions. Dear Larissa Petrovna, we accept your comments and promise to take them into account in our future work. Once again, we thank the highly respected members of the Dissertation Council for their questions and comments that open up prospects for further research on our specific problem. Thank you. Dear board members, Are you satisfied with the answers? The answer is positive, and those who are present in the hall, who are non-board members, no more than 2 minutes per each speaker. Are there any volunteers? No volunteers. And internal questions concerning the text of the dissertation. No questions. The applicant's answers to the questions and comments. There are no such answers because there are no questions. Supervisor's speech. Leonid Viktorovich, the floor is yours. Distinguished colleagues, Hsieh Sin Yu from February to April 2021 prepared her dissertation for the degree of the candidate of sciences at St. Petersburg University without mastering the programs of preparation as a postgraduate students. It took only 3 months. She had a large text of dissertation, which had to be changed and processed. She managed to do it, and as a result, she was recommended for the defense. What I want to highlight concerning this work, the work was very intensive. During these 3 months, we tried to make the text shorter, and the first text was linguistically overload. The first chapter was changed. We worked with the tables. A theoretical chapter was seriously shortened, and I asked Sin Yu to broaden methodological paragraphs. And as for the main results of the research, the work of Sin Yu defined the content of education of foreign students, B2 level, interrogative sentences appear at A1 level in the text, and what should we do at B2 level? She offered it and explained. It's very interesting for our colleagues who work with linguodidactical explanation. The table of correlations of types of modal shades and international constructions of nonverbal means of communication. It was offered by Sin Yu, and then I agree with Larissa Petrovna that scientific novelty of this work is in this comparative aspect. At the very beginning, this correlation of Russian and Chinese was represented wider in the work. But nevertheless, I insisted on the fact that something should be shortened. It's very interesting. There are moments we can't evaluate ourselves, and Chinese specialists are usually invited. And everything should be clearly represented. I recommended not to make this paragraph more complex, and the exercises should have been simplified. The complex of tasks and exercises was not changed, and I asked to explain this complex more clearly. We discussed the question about the principles of teaching. Her idea about algorithms and introduction of material from different angles. And a few words about the personality of the candidate. I want to highlight her independence and hardworking character. And when I mentioned about shortening of the first chapter, Sin Yu did her best to do it. I remember my postgraduate years, and my scientific supervisor also recommended me to shorten the text of my dissertation. Hsieh Sin Yu is a hardworking person. All my advice was accepted and quickly, and it allowed her to change her dissertation in such a short term. The results Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, are there any volunteers to say a few words among board members, among those who are present? I want to say a few words. A few words. The matter is, my doctoral thesis and further studies are connected with nonverbal means of communication. And it was very interesting for me to read this dissertation. And as an advice, the main choice of work with nonverbal means of communication is supervision and analysis. The behavior of a person should be analyzed. If before we could use only photos and pictures, descriptions, now we have modern technologies, digital technologies. We can look into every gesture, every movement, and it should have been used in the dissertation and for further work to correlate gestures in this interrogative sentences, gesture culture, to compare the culture of Russia and China. And these visualized fragments, they could be selected, and if we take the film, there is a special game or role play, parts of films, real life recorded. It would be wonderful taking into account modern pedagogical and methodological trends. I would like to wish you every success in this direction. I have a small question. From my point of view, I teach discipline comparative linguoculturology, and I was interested in the moment of comparative analysis of Russian speech acts and the analogs in Chinese language, and plus non-verbal means of communication. And I would like to recommend to deepen in the essence of this question. Please publish articles which will become very actual, because we have more and more students from China, and our department works with Chinese students, and this comparative analysis for me was very useful and interesting, and I would like to read your articles on this topic with more deepened approach. Are there any other questions? No questions. The discussion and receiving questions are finished. And dear board members, do you have any remarks or questions concerning the procedure of our meeting, including the remote interactive mode? Елена Leonidovna? No questions? No questions. No questions. And voting. Dear colleagues, before the beginning of the voting, we have the opportunity to announce a break before the start of voting. Do you think we need such a break to discuss the results of the defense? No, we don't need. If discussion of the results of the defense is not required, then we continue the meeting and proceed to voting. In this case, the opinion of each member of the Dissertation Council on this issue is voiced publicly and independently. We don't need a break. Please check. Now it is 12:28 according to Moscow time. Dear colleagues, please check if we all hear and see each other. The answer is positive. I am raising the question of awarding Hsieh Sin Yu the degree of the candidate of pedagogical sciences in the scientific specialization 582, Theory and Methods of Training and Education, Russian as a Foreign Language, level of professional education, to an open roll call. Every board member agrees that points 11 and 9 were not violated by the candidate. Point 1, I remind you that the decision and when using in the dissertation the results of scientific papers performed by the applicant for a scientific degree personally or in co-authorship, the applicant for an academic degree is obliged to note this circumstance in the dissertation. I remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Council on the issue of awarding an academic degree is considered positive if more than half, but at least 3 members of the Dissertation Council who participated in the meeting voted for it, in accordance with Clause 23 of the procedure. Nina Fedotova, do you agree? Yes. Galina? Yes. I was familiar with the work of our candidate before. And now I am sure that it is a great contribution. It is a completed work and I fully support it. Board member Elena Cherkova, I agree. Thank you. Board member Ekaterina Protasova, your opinion? I am for. And me, Chairperson Larisa Tarnaeva, my opinion is also positive. Thus, distinguished colleagues and guests, I announce that out of 5 board members who are present today, 5 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained from vote. The decision on awarding Hsieh Sin Yu the scientific degree of the candidate of pedagogical sciences in scientific specialization 582, theory and methods of training and education, Russian as a foreign language, level of professional education is accepted. And concluding remark by our candidate, distinguished chairperson, board members, guests, I would like to express my gratitude to all those who took part in the preparation and discussion of my dissertation. First of all, I would like to thank my parents. Dear mother and father, thank you for this support and help and advice. Secondly, I would like to express my gratitude to my scientific supervisor, Leonid Moskovkin, for the advice, remarks, and help at all stages of the preparation. Thirdly, I would like to express my gratitude to my friend Daria Kavreshkina for her constant support, and I would like to express my gratitude to the my opponents Larisa Petrovna Tarnaeva, Galina Mikhailovna Vasilyevna, Ekaterina Yurievna Protasova, Irina Ivanovna, Elena Ivanovna Cherkova, Nina Leonidovna Fedotova for their feedback, and they helped me to understand the problem deeper. I would like to express my gratitude to the interpreter and video operator for their work, and finally I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all board members for their remarks and advice. Thank you very much. The meeting of the Dissertation Council is closed. Please switch off the live broadcast of the meeting and microphones.